Well, by now you probably have heard that our pastor search team is going to be bringing a huge announcement for us today. I put the emphasis on huge, a very special announcement, and we're glad that you're here today. If you're visiting with us, this particular Sunday is when our pastor search team, who has been working since February to help us find a new pastor, I'm retiring. Today they're going to be sharing it. So you're here today on a very special day. I'm glad you could be here. The passage that we're going to be looking at is in Numbers chapter 27. That's in the Old Testament. Numbers 27. It's the fourth book in the Bible. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. And I don't know what app you push on your phone to pull that up, but you can do that as well. But this is a happy and exciting day for our church. I hope that you sense that. We have been praying since January the 1st. That's when I made the announcement that I would be retiring by the end of the year. And you selected a team in late part of January, early part of February, and then they got to work immediately after that and been working down to this very day. You'll need to know that they received, I had 165 resumes, that's what I'd heard, but they've even received a few applications since last week, so even a few more have come in. But that's a lot of resumes to go through, and they'll be sharing with you that process in just a moment. But I wanted to share with you today what has led me as your pastor to this point, and look at it from this particular text, Numbers 27. But let's look at it. I'll read it through, and then we'll make some comments about it. The Lord said to Moses, "Go up into this mountain of Abarim," and this account is told about 3 different times in the Old Testament, with varying information. We know the name of the particular mountain was Mount Nebo. This Abarim was a series of mountains, and Mount Nebo was the exact one. That I have given to the people, and see the land that I have given to the people of Israel. When you have seen it, you also shall be gathered to your people as your brother Aaron was. Because, and here's the reason, you rebelled against my word in the wilderness of Zin, when the congregation quarreled, failing to uphold me as holy at the waters before their eyes. These are the waters of Meribah, of Kadesh, in the wilderness of Zin. Then Moses spoke to the Lord, saying, "Let the Lord, the God of the spirits of all flesh, appoint a man over the congregation, who shall go out before them and come in before them, who shall lead them out and bring them in, that the congregation of the Lord may not be as sheep that have no shepherd." So the Lord said to Moses, "Take Joshua, the son of Nun, a man in whom is the Spirit, and lay your hand on him. Make him stand before Eleazar the priest and all the congregation, and you shall commission him in their sight. You shall invest him with some of your authority, that all the congregation of the people of Israel may obey. And he shall stand before Eleazar the priest, who shall inquire for him by the judgment of the Urim before the Lord. At his word they shall go out, and at his word they shall come in, both he and all the people of Israel with him, the whole congregation." And Moses did as the Lord commanded him. He took Joshua and made him stand before Eleazar the priest and the whole congregation, and he laid his hands on him and commissioned him as the Lord directed through Moses. In the first 3 verses, 12, 13, and 14, we see the reason for pastoral succession. Moses is, at this particular time, he's 120 years old, but don't let that fake you out, because we're told that his strength was just as good as it ever was, and it just so happened that he had disobeyed the Lord. And so there was a reason for the pastoral succession from Moses to Joshua. One of the books that has been helpful to me during this transition time has been this book called Next, Pastoral Succession That Works. And I'll say a few more things about it in just a minute. But in this chapter 4, it lists 4 different types of pastoral succession. And let me share them with you. One is emergency. An unforeseen, sudden, often crisis-laden succession that can include death or other tragic events are one of the following: either short-term, long-term, or permanent. And we have had to face that this year with the unexpected, unforeseen death of our beloved Dennis Brown, who had been with us for almost 30 years. Fortunately, we have 2 people in our congregation that has been able to step in, Chuck Hartness in our first service and Roger Smith in our second service. This is one of the reasons why there needs to be succession planning taking place, because you never know when an emergency may arise. A second reason is disqualification, and this is where Moses fits in. Sometimes a pastor is no longer qualified to be pastor of a church, and here are some examples when there's been a moral failure. Most disqualifications stem from moral failure. The majority involve abuse of sex, money, and or power. Some involve serious breaking of the law or other major improprieties. There have been pastors that have embezzled their churches. Yeah. And things like that, that's a disqualification for service. Another is doctrinal heresy or deviation from accepted biblical standards. This includes pastors whose approach to ministry shifts drastically enough that they are no longer a fit for their church. And another is loss of physical core competencies. Sometimes disqualifications relates to loss of energy or vision, preaching ability, or other physical core competencies required for the role of pastor. In Moses' case, he was disqualified for a moral failure. Those of you who remember the story will remember it well. The people of Israel, there in the wilderness, they were needing water, and they let Moses know they wanted water. And so Moses and Aaron went to God and said, "Oh, the people need water." And God says, "I've got this covered." He said, "I want you to speak to this rock, and it will flow forth with water, and it'll take care of everybody." Do you know what Moses and Aaron did? They didn't speak to the rock. They were angry. And Moses took his staff and hit the rock, not once, but twice. And then it's what he said after this. "Shall we bring water out of this rock for you?" And God said, "Moses, you've trespassed. You have taken my glory from myself, and you've taken it upon yourself. It's not you, Moses, bringing that water out of that rock." Moses was disqualified. Do you know Moses, as I said, was 120 years old? That should warn every one of us that you never get too old to make a mistake. So he was disqualified. Another possibility is a forced retirement or a forced pastoral succession where the pastor's been fired for one reason or another, and that certainly has happened. And then there's the expected kind, and you expect these. Like when a pastor receives a call to another church, that is an expected transition and a succession to follow. Or a church rotation. Now, we as Baptists, we don't have to worry about that one because we as a congregation call our pastors, not another group somewhere else. We do it ourselves. And then retirement. And of course, that's the situation that we're in now. In many cases, retirement is long planned, but sometimes circumstances prompt a short countdown to retirement, whether partial or full. Partial retirement may involve, shifting to a new role in the existing church, such as visitation pastor, mission pastor, or senior adult pastor. That's not happening with me. I'm just becoming a member of the church, just like you. I'll be sitting out there with you in just a little, little while. So those are 4 possibilities. Could be emergency, disqualification, forced, or expected. Now, I want to share with you from my own personal journey so you'll know my heart in this. I've told you some of it, but I want to share the rest of it with you today. It actually started back in the summer of 2016. Just going about my regular work as your pastor, I began to sense a sense of change coming. Have you ever felt that? That there was an impression that you were given that something's going to change. I didn't know quite what it was, but there was an uneasiness to it. And whenever that generally happens, I call my mentor. I hope you have a mentor in your life, somebody that you can talk to that's older than you, that's been down the road before and can help you. And I called, used to be the pastor of this church back when I was a teenager, like many of you, Dr. Fred Steelman. He's been my mentor ever since I began the ministry when I was 25 years old. And I called him up, and we talked for over an hour. I was asking him questions. He was asking me questions. And then not long after that, I was at the bookstore, Lifeway bookstore, and found this book called Next, A Pastoral Succession That Works. That subtitle is what got my attention. That works, because I've known churches that have gone through pastoral successions that didn't work very well. And I didn't want that to happen at the church I loved. And so I began to read this book, and in chapter 4, I want to share with you, they list 10 different things to help you to understand if there's a move in the making of some kind. And I want to share these with you and tell you which one of these spoke to me. One was, God gives you a clear sign. Well, that didn't really happen for me. This may range from scripture that comes alive to a vision or a dream, or even to contemporaries who begin to hint at their own transition and or retirement. Sometimes compelling circumstances serve as a divine sign, such as a financial situation becoming unworkable. That didn't speak to me. Number 2, your leadership speaks. Your spiritual authority may be a denominational superintendent or a bishop or the governance board at your church. Well, as I said, we as Baptists, we do this ourselves, not from some other agency. Number 3, this is one of the ones that got my attention. Your part of the mission is complete. It goes on to say, you have fulfilled what God originally called you to do, and God has not extended or enlarged the challenge. That last part got my attention. Because I've had a metaphor that I've sort of kept to myself. I've not really shared it with many people, but of my role here as your pastor during these almost 10 years now. It's been like a hinge on a door. You don't really notice the hinge so much, but the hinge is there to allow a door to swing back and forth. And as I came in, having been a part of this church since 1967, a lot of our older people knew me. It's amazing they even called me to come, to be honest with you, after having grown up here as a teenager. But they knew me. And they trusted me. They trusted my mom and dad and my sister, our family, because this church has been our home for all these years. And so be able to relate to our senior adults and also to help our young adults come together and make some major decisions that would help our church. And we've been able to do that. We flip-flopped our worship services, for one thing. We did that. And then we took on a humongous, I'm talking a humongous, that word is not even in the dictionary, but you know what I'm talking about, of our mid-sized church looking at building new facilities to the tune of almost $7 million almost. Our little congregation. And that is coming to pass. And in the summer of 2016, God began to say to me, Mike, look what's happening. Look beyond the completion of the children's building. Look beyond when our adult commons space is finally completed, which will be very soon. And I began to ask myself, do I have a vision beyond that? And the answer was, no, I don't. So this spoke to me that it's time to be thinking about retirement. Number 4, you lose heart. The passion or other spiritual fire you once knew for this church and situation has clearly departed. Well, no, that's not it. I still have a passion for this church. I want our church to succeed and to grow. Number 5, others confirm it. Your close friends or other trusted advisors affirm that your time at this church is finished. Well, if you thought that, you never told me, and I'm so thankful. I'm so thankful for that. Number 6, you receive a new call. This may start in your heart or is in an actual invitation from another church or ministry. I can tell you that I've had 2 or 3 different invitations or calls to do other things, either to get back in academia. That's been a possibility. Other churches, I've had 2 committees to ask me to come. But no, I've not felt that at all. So it wasn't that. Number 7 spoke to me. A mismatch develops. You can no longer reach those your church needs to reach, such as a certain age group, economic level, lifestyle, or racial demographic. Perhaps the church's vision has shifted and you can no longer align with it. Well, not that part, but the first part spoke to me. You can no longer reach those your church needs to reach. Our church needs to reach younger people. You need to hear that. Our church needs to reach younger people. The average age of our congregation hasn't really changed all that much. It's still in the early 50s. One of the struggles that we have here in all churches in our area is due to our constituency. We are a military area. It takes reaching 3 people to retain 1. Every church in our town struggles with that. It takes a lot of effort to reach people and to grow, and especially younger people. And I began to sense that I was relating more easily with people my age and older, and I was finding it a struggle to reach and be in contact with younger people. I mean, I love people. I love younger people. It makes me feel young to be around them. But there comes a time when there just is too much distance, age-wise, between somebody that's a senior and somebody that's younger. And so that one caught my eye. Number 8, collaboration ends. The place you serve becomes more of an enemy than your ally. That doesn't apply at all. I hope if you're my enemy, you've not told me, and I'm so thankful. I'm so thankful. Number 9, the church begins to show a lack of confidence in your vision and our leadership. Attendance may decline or plateau. That caught my attention because as a church, we have sort of leveled out. We have plateaued a bit. That caught my attention. Perhaps it has potential to go forward in its mission, but you don't seem to be the right one to provide the leadership training and outreach the church needs for its next chapter. That spoke to me. And then number 10, you reach physical or emotional limits. You no longer have the physical strength, mental quickness, or physical agility to do the job needed. Well, I still feel like I've got strength and I've still got some agility. Now, my mental quickness, you may feel like, yeah, it's time for the old fella just to go on, you know. But so at least 3 of these spoke to me during the summer of 2016. Then I began to discuss it with Nancy. And I said, Nancy, these are some things that the Lord has seemed to be directing toward me. And she said, well, Mike, you know what? You need to listen. And so we began to pray about it together. And then I became convinced in December of 2016 that it was the right thing to do, and on January the 1st, I shared it with you. I wanted to give the church at least a year to find the next pastor for our church. I had some people come up to me and say, that's not going to happen. You're going to be still preaching at Christmas. Our church takes so long to find people. It takes, I want to tell you something. That's not the case this time. I'm going to tell you that. So those are just some of the background for where I have come to at this stage. Now, in verses 15 through 17, we see Moses make a request of God. He says in verse 15 to the Lord, "Let the Lord, the God of the spirits of all flesh, appoint a man over the congregation." Moses said, "Okay, if I'm not the one to go forward with the people, oh Lord, please appoint somebody. Please appoint somebody." And notice some of the things that he requested. He calls the God of the spirits of all flesh. Moses seeks out and requests for God's sovereignty to work in this situation. It's much larger than Moses. He needed God to be sovereign in this. And then he says, someone to lead them in and take them out. Bring them out and bring them in. Those were instructions for a military leader. When Israel had to be an army, to be militant, to move forward. Here he's asking for a person with a leader's mind. But notice he goes on to say that they be not like sheep without a shepherd. He needed to have a shepherd's heart, a leader's mind, and a shepherd's heart. That was Moses' request. And then finally, in verses 18 through 23, is God's response to this request. He said to him, "Moses, I've got the man." God knew before Moses did. Well, he's sovereign. He ought to know that, right? He says, "I know his name is Joshua." Now, Moses knew Joshua. He had been his helper and servant for so long. But Joshua was at least 40 years younger than Moses. At least. He was from a different generation. And the person that they're going to present to you today is a younger person. Can you think almost half my age? Well, Joshua was quite a bit younger than Moses. And this person, because he's from a different generation, will probably look different. And I'm so glad. Aren't you tired of looking at these baggy eyes? And, he sort of walks like, He's going to look different. He's going to preach different. He's probably going to dress differently. Maybe his hair is different from mine. I hope so. I hope so. But notice what God says about this man. He's a man in whom is the Spirit. A man in whom is the Spirit. God says it's not just about being from a younger generation. He needs to be a man with the Spirit of God in him. And the whole congregation, notice at the end of verse 21 that he says, both he and all the people of Israel with him, the whole congregation, all of us together. And it's difficult for us because we're in two different services. Generally, this one is our younger people. Generally, first one is our senior adults. And because he's going to be from a younger generation, he's going to see things differently. He's going to a worldview that's going to be in some ways different. We don't need to be afraid of that. We don't need to be afraid of it. Our senior adults need to come alongside him and provide the mentorship. that he will need, the support that he will need, and support him and stand with him. And you as younger people, you don't need to see him as your buddy. He will be your pastor. There's a difference. Yes, he's going to love you and he wants you to love him. But he needs to be your pastor, not just your buddy. So together, the whole congregation, and he will stand before the priest. Who's our high priest now? It's not the pastor. It's Jesus Christ. He is the great high priest. And he's also the good shepherd. And so we as under shepherds, myself and our next pastor, we're under shepherds, but we're pointing always to the great good shepherd.